Welcome everyone. This is Figma Live. My name is Akbar. I'm a developer advocate here at Figma, and I'm really excited to be talking about shipping designs with AI at Anthropic. We have an amazing guest with us today, Meaghan Choi. Meaghan, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Meaghan. I'm a product design lead here at Anthropic, and I help support the Claude Code team. And I'm super, super excited to be talking about how we kind of ship designs at Anthropic.
I'm really excited to see all of this.
Amazing. Well, before we get too deep into things, I can kick us off with a little bit of an overview of what I work on and kind of how it relates to some of the work that's being done at Figma today. And so if we get into things, the product that I work on at Anthropic is called Claude Code. For those of you who aren't familiar, maybe unbiased, but I think it's one of the best agentic coding tools after there, with maybe some heavy bias out there because I use it on the daily and it's a product that I help build. But if you aren't familiar with this space, Claude Code is what I would consider one of the thinnest wrappers that we have around our models. You know, at the end of the day, most AI tools are wrappers around base models. Claude Code is a terminal or a command line interface tool. So you access it through terminal if you're on Mac. And what it does is it lets you kind of access the power of our Claude models specifically on your computer so that you have access to your entire code base if you have it locally. And that lets you really kind of take a very programmatic approach. It's really based off of the idea of agent architecture. So you kind of interact with Claude, ask it questions. Claude will implement those features directly in your code base. So a lot less copying and pasting than you would normally need. And it's not just one product actually right now, it is two. And so the one that most folks are familiar with and a lot of designers will interact with the most is our terminal product. And this is really kind of, you can consider the front end or the interface to Claude Code. It lives locally on your computer and it just really lets you kind of hit the ground running on developments. The second is kind of our more superpowered tool, I would say. It's our SDK. And if you're a builder or a tinkerer, this lets you use the power of the entire product we built into Claude Code actually, but lets you build your own custom agentic workflows. And so some examples of these that we've built ourselves are Claude Code running in GitHub, which lets you at Claude directly on a PR or in an issue, and Claude will try and resolve it directly there. Where I tend to use Claude Code the most, though, is actually in our IDE integration. So VS Code, if you use it, Cursor, JetBrains, they all have the ability to access a terminal inside this development environment. If you do use VS Code or JetBrains specifically, we have a custom extension built that lets you do a little bit more exciting things. It's as easy as just running the command Claude the same way you would in your terminal in your IDE. And then you're really able to leverage a lot of the superpowers of using both an IDE and an agentic developer tool by having context of the files you're looking at, the lines of codes you have highlighted, and browsing the diffs and the changes that Claude's making along the way. And at a high level, that's a lot of like how you access Claude Code and like what it is, but really how it works and how kind of, I think it's important to think about how it works is the main use cases and things that you can accomplish with Claude Code now that it's available. And so there's kind of four big tenets that we like to talk about. The first is that Claude Code really just understands your code. And so unlike, previous generations where you'd need to maybe train a model to understand your code base or like run RAG over your code base, Claude Code is living in your code base and has deep awareness and knowledge of what's happening. It can search everything in your monorepo or in your files and really understand the systems and designs that you have and implement it in place. The second, and part of the design decision that we made to run it in a command line interface, is that it can use all the same command line tools that your computer does. Any test scripts that you have, any Git integrations, Kubernetes, any database solutions that you have, we can integrate directly into your computer, and Claude has access to everything that your computer locally has access to as well. A third is that you can run it from anywhere, and I'll get into some of the pro tips of this later. The most common is in terminal, and it might seem a little bit strange, like terminal is a very, very technical tool, but by building into terminal, you're actually able to launch it in context in a lot of other developer applications like in IDE. And we really believe in meeting our users where they are and not needing to break their workflows. And this just felt like the most natural way to be able to support whatever existing surfaces and workflows that developers are working. And finally, it's very, very secure. If you have read anything about Anthropic, you know we care a lot about our values of security, privacy, and safety. And so all of your queries through Claude Code go immediately through our API. There's no intermediary for storage or code indexes. And so it's really secure, all your requests in your code base. And on top of that, Claude Code, because it lives in terminal, will always check with you before it makes any major changes to your code base or computer. That is extremely important, especially in terminal.
Thank you so much for that overview, Meaghan. I think this is the most that I've heard about Claude Code in a long time, and I'm really happy that you brought up that security point, because it kind of segues pretty neatly into the dev mode MCP server story. And for those that don't know, the dev mode MCP server helps inform AI tools with design intent and Figma context so that they can generate better code that matches your initial design intent, but also get all of that design context that you have in a Figma file and use it for a variety of different tasks. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. And this is an open standard that Anthropic introduced that allows simple, secure, two-way connections between AI agents and the software tools that you're already using. And that with that, we get a lot of benefits, and we're going to take a look at what that looks like when it comes to design-informed code generation. So I'm going to start off with just a little history. As we already know, today, AI does a really decent job of generating functional code for UI. And so we can provide a prompt and we can get an output that looks a lot more like a final UI than we have before. And with the advent of agentic coding tools like Copilot and VS Code, Claude Code, for instance, now we can also provide that code-based context directly to our LLMs. And what that means is that the code that's being generated is a lot more aligned to patterns that we already have in our code base. Now, this is helpful for engineers, but this also means that we have more tested, higher quality code that's being generated that aligns to the standards that you're already familiar with. Now, we can take that a step even further with the dev mode MCP server by providing design context to that mix. And so not only will your app function like your code base, but it will also look like what the initial designs that you've sketched out in Figma and bring that context over. So this comes in component and variables metadata, screenshots, assets, our code representation of what that design looks like. Our MCP server provides agents with the context that they need to write production-grade UI code. Now, our MCP server acts as a multiplier of the best practices that you're already doing. Everything that teams are doing to invest in Figma as a way to align between design and code that they do for people, we are extending that to LLMs via the MCP server. Now, when we're talking about that context, we're talking about a lot of the different design details that you might have in Figma. This could be your Figma components. This could be variables, styles, typography that's being used. And we also get information about the structure of your design. So like layer names and metadata, even annotations, and soon to dev resources. With all of that information, we're able to inform your builds and provide design specific information so that on the first try, the outputs match are a lot closer to final production code. So let's take a look at what that looks like in action. We're going to look at how it works. So over here, we have a design for a pricing card section of a web page that we want to build. And so we'll select it in Figma. A quick call out over here is currently the Figma dev mode MCP server requires the Figma desktop app and in dev mode. And so when we're in dev mode and we select this frame, then over in our code tool, in this case, Copilot for VS Code, we ask Copilot to implement our current Figma selection. And now it's going to get all the information from our selection from Figma and then start to process it. Then we'll get an output that takes into account some of the code representation and design systems metadata. And we can really see the LLM is reading those files directly without you having to search. And then it implements those components for the design. And that's exactly what we want to see from these agentic code editors. And now something that's really super cool about this is that the result doesn't just match, it actually represents some of the differences that we want to be able to see in code versus in design. So for example, one of the things that you might notice is that our design looks a little bit different from what we're seeing in the representation. So our web browser is in dark mode and the design was in light mode. And since it's using that code base context, we're able to take advantage of the design tokens and represent what it would look like in a real environment. Another thing that you might notice is that we're handling state in the prototype that was generated. And so we can switch between monthly and yearly, and we can even select the different pricing cards. So all of this information just kind of demonstrates how design context and code base context can be used together to generate the right front end code. And we're really excited about how this can bring design intent into your code bases more easily and how it can supercharge your team's workflows. Now, I'm going to pass it off to Meaghan to do a deep dive of Claude Code and how they use Figma in their design to dev workflows.
Amazing. I am always so thrilled when I see different examples of kind of design tools and developer tools coming together. It really feels like we're at the forefront of bridging that gap. And part of what makes me so excited to work on developer tools here at Anthropic is that it's really not just helping developers carve new workflows, but it's also really helping shape how designers work as well. And I can really think you can break down the new kind of capabilities or the new use cases that have been unlocked by AI development and design through Claude Code and a lot of other agentic coding projects into three main use cases. I would actually say, interestingly enough, the first one here is the one that most people automatically gravitate towards because it's the easiest to understand and the most top of mind. But these latter two are the actual ones that I'm most excited about and I use on a day-to-day basis. So if we break these down, the first is, 0 to 1 explorations where you get to prototype net new ideas. But often these are very much in a silo and they're not necessarily integrated with a code base, but it's very easy to get started. And you can even do this today in a lot of chatbots. The second, which I think is extremely exciting, is that you can build directly into the code base itself. And so your prototyping of new features or even launching of new features or small changes can happen directly with the code base. You don't even necessarily need to chat with an engineer. You can just start it on your own and iterate with them. And it's actually live and in whatever staging or development environment that you have, and eventually can become a production feature. And then finally, the third and the one I probably use the most on a day-to-day basis is really just understanding my code base, asking questions, how is this feature implemented? What are the edge cases for this? And I'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these so you can understand kind of what it looks like actually in product, especially using Claude Code. For this 0 to 1 exploration space, a lot of the time, this is really about transforming new ideas into working prototypes quickly. Some of the phrases that you tend to hear here are the opportunity cost of an idea is 0 now because you can really, really quickly prototype it into something new. And I think that's such an exciting capability. But one of the limitations of this is that it's not super often, honestly, that we're building 100% net new surfaces or 100% net new technology. More often than not, we're integrating into an existing product or over top of an existing architecture, and that understanding of how the code is really important. And so how I tend to use this in 0 to 1 explorations is actually predominantly in micro interactions. So you can see the example that I used here. I was actually trying to really fine tune an animation for a very small toggle. And I didn't really need full understanding of the code base to do this. I was just actually testing a bunch of different ways that I could animate a little toggle and make that fun. And so I think really what you get into here is individual features on their own outside of the product space are really easy to prototype, or very blue sky 0 to 1 explorations for prototyping. And while that's extremely exciting, I think where it gets even cooler is being able to build directly into the code base. So one side note that I'll make here is that this does require GitHub or GitLab or whatever kind of code versioning tool access you use and access to your company repository permissions. But I guarantee you, you can ask almost any engineer on your team and they'll be happy to help you get that set up because that's what they're using every day. And the most exciting piece about this is actually that you're building directly into the code. One of my dreams as an early designer was to be able to ship a line of code to a production app. It didn't really matter where, and it was pretty hard to do at the time, just because I wasn't really comfortable with all of the different testing environments, all of the different code setup, all the different design systems and requirements and choices that the different companies I was working as made. But what Claude Code allows you to do, and a lot of these agentic coding products, is that they're nested into your company's code base. So they have a very deep understanding of the products. And not only that, all the questions that you used to ask an engineer, how do I preview this locally? What does this do? What's the next step? Like if this, I need to make this into a branch. What is a branch? How do I make that? Should this be one branch? Should this be two? I ask the most basic of basic questions in Claude Code, and Claude Code will not only execute it for me and write the code, but it'll also explain it along the way if I have questions. And it's really just unlocking a new frontier of abilities for me. A
I
fun fact.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was like, I'd love to chime in here and just say that like I love seeing this. One, that as a designer, you're able to go ahead and experiment and do all the things that you love about design, but then also bring that work back to your engineers in terms of, oh, like this feature looks awesome. And like I already have like a Raptor prototype that I can kind of start with and build with and take that forward. And especially using actual code base patterns, right? Like that's something that's so powerful about designer developer collaboration, especially when it comes to using these tools to bridge that gap. And I'm really excited that you're chatting about this.
Oh, amazing. I'm also very excited. This is one of those, soapbox moments that I always get on when I talk about Claude Code. There's actually a really cool feature that I helped ship in this app that you see here, which is our API developer tool. And I actually added a new permission structure to this kind of product, which for those who aren't familiar is a very architectural kind of backend heavy decision to make and implement. And the interesting piece here is I had the UX for it and I just wanted to test it out to see what it would look like what you'd be able to see as that permission role. And so I just asked Claude to help me implement it. And I would Claude couldn't get it 100% right, but Claude did get me 70% of the way there. And I do want to call out a piece here that I find always important to emphasize is I then reached out to my eng partner and I was like, hey, I got us 70% of the way here. This is roughly what I wanted to look like. Can you help me get it that remaining 30% over the line? And so this doesn't really replace anyone's work. It actually just augments your ability to move faster and get things done easier. And my engineer were chatting about this after, and we're like, holy crap, this might be the new way of building things because it's just that much more effective and efficient. And it just lets everyone be a little bit more in the actual product than before.
Yeah, and I love the emphasis of keeping the human in the loop and having those conversations, right? Like this is meant to make that collaboration even easier and make it easier for you to be able to share your ideas and bring those to code even faster.
Exactly. And then the last, maybe I would say least exciting, but probably most underrated use case of Claude Code is really just understanding the code base, and not just understanding your code base, but actually iterating on how a feature should be designed with Claude Code. So you could imagine, let's say you're designing a new status indicator for a system, and you need to understand all the existing statuses, all the existing edge cases, all the existing roles and permissions. I actually frequently use Claude Code to understand how to design Claude Code itself. So a little bit of inception here, but this is an example where I was trying to understand all the warning states that we had in Claude Code today. And if there is a way that we needed to combine them together, how should we categorize them? And I went back and forth a lot with Claude on different ways we should call these things, what's considered an error, a flag, a warning, what's extra detail or metadata. And generally, I would maybe do this over a week of discussion back and forth and meeting time with a PM and an engineer. But I was able to just get all the information I needed to make an architectural proposal and a design proposal initially with my team, because all my engineers who implemented these features, they understand this. They understand the logic baked in. And this was really just about helping me make those informed design decisions to get to a V0 even faster. And so I would actually say this is my number one use case of Claude Code today right now, which is just understanding how features are built. A pro tip, if you're working in an AI app or an AI use case, you can also ask for the system prompt that your team is using, and then you can tweak it to test it to see what different outputs might be.
I love this use case because this has also been some of the most helpful things for me. With tools like the Figma MCP server, with Claude Code, being able to just ask questions about things that you might not have been involved with when they were created, but being able to catch up and get a chance to get a really tailored look at any of those things, and then bring that knowledge back to the team in terms of like, oh, hey, like this is what I understand this to be. Is that actually accurate? And bringing that that shared understanding that allows us to build even better in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say sometimes I leave little sneaky comments on my engineer's code as well from understanding it. Like, hey, I get that it works this way today, but the next time we implement this or update this, would love to see it work that way. And it just kind of gets you working where your team is working and working directly with them, which I think is where we really want to be at the end of the day. So a lot of this was really high level and existential, but I'm going to get into like three kind of big categories of tips that I'd recommend if you want to get started using Claude Code. The first is a claude.md file. So claude.md files are memory files. A lot of kind of coding agents have this concept. You can kind of think of it like a subsystem prompt a little bit, or like guidelines or rules that you want Claude to follow. For us at Anthropic, you can have one that's with the entire code base, so everyone at the company has access to it. And then you can also have a personal Claude MD file, which is really just personal rules that you have. And so this is literally a copy and paste version of what lives in my personal Claude.md file. And it's really actually helped tailor Claude Code, which at the end of the day is built for developers, to be able to also be built for designers. And I literally call it on the first line, I am a product designer. I don't have coding experience. Give me more detailed explanations, break down changes smaller. I iterated on this a few times with Claude to make it more personalized to me. I encourage you to do the same. And I'd also encourage you, if you're kind of getting started in your company's code base on your own, to work with an engineer, if you have them, to use these claude.md files to actually write rules for the code base itself, because then Claude will adhere to any design decisions that are made, any test scripts that need to be run, any kind of ways to name PRs or commits, things like that. All the like good hygiene for coding that before you needed maybe months to onboard into a code base, Claude will just do automatically. And as a designer who doesn't even know what to ask about hygiene or like what those things were, Claude just does it automatically. And I just don't really think about it that much.
I love that call out on the instructions file as well, just because this is another tool that we use on the design system side to help make sure that Claude or any other agent is using our design system patterns the way that we intend them to. And then we also provide things like, oh, this is an example of how you might compose some of these components, or this is a common pitfall that you might run into. Don't do it this way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the best Claude.md files are actually written together by a team or a tech lead, and then they're just updated and iterated over time. It's almost like the new README file, except specific to a different to the LLMs that you're working with.
100%. And then that brings the emphasis back on, again, that collaboration. Ultimately, like these are tools to help us collaborate even smoother together and make sure that we're speaking the same language and that we're working together to build a better product.
Absolutely. Could not have said it better. The second big kind of tool case that I'm going to call out is on kind of the best way to work as a designer in Claude Code. You know, I gave you a lot of information right now, but I think a big one that I'll call out is kind of these 5 different very niche workflows, but ones that you'll see very often. The first I called out is kind of that 0 to 1 exploration. You just kind of make something real really, really fast. And well, that's the easiest one to understand and the easiest one to lean on. I actually think the next 4 are the more exciting. And so the second one is just to explore your code base, understand the history and decisions that were made along the way, understand the current state of your product, even check if something that you thought was implemented maybe wasn't implemented at all. The third one is to actually plan projects. This is a very nifty one that I found that, you know, my engineers and I go back and forth on how accurate it is. But sometimes my engineers will say, hey, that'll actually take too long to implement. And then I'll ask Claude, hey, how hard is it to implement this? How long do you think it would take a human to do this? Obviously, you don't want to use AI to undermine your coworkers, but you can prompt it more and say like, hey, like, can you break this down? Like, can you help chunk it out? Like if we only had 1 week, like what would the scope be to get this done in 1 week? And that actually helps kind of facilitate the discussions that you might not have been able to have before, but you now have the information to do.
One thing that I'd love to chime in here is this can be a great way to help understand and reframe potentially what it is that you're proposing, right? Like maybe there's an alternative in your system that you can get to in that period of time that can help build the groundwork for something later on. And this can help inform just what those other possibilities might be.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. And it just kind of demystifies a little bit a lot of that scoping and engineering design decision making that happens after our design mocks are done and ready. The fourth one is actually to prototype. So you can implement code yourself and test features directly in product if you want to. I do this pretty frequently actually on smaller to medium-sized changes of like that new kind of role that I was mentioning. Sometimes I'll do it on like new interactions that we're trying to prototype or new features that we're trying to build out. And that bleeds a little bit into this fifth one, which I actually find the most emboldening, I would say, as a designer, is that last 2% that you could never really get to, or it's hard to get to, like the things that are not P0 for launch, but are maybe like P1 or P2, that like nitty gritty of design polish, you can now just implement it now. I maybe have like 10 to 15 PRs open at any given time for like small changes I want to make on typography, color spacing, elevation. This should be made infinitely easier now with Claude Code. And on top of that, even more infinitely easier if you're using the Figma MCP on top of it, because then you don't even have to prompt Claude. You just have to hand over your, connect to your Figma itself, and then it'll work seamlessly. And then some nifty tricks that I'd recommend that I use almost on the daily. The first is there's different modes you can be in Claude Code. So Shift Tab is to auto accept edits. I am in this almost frequently because the actual detailed line by line changes that Claude Code is making, I have a harder time understanding than just the final working output. But one thing that I do use very often is this mode called plan mode, where Claude Code is not going to be writing any code itself. You're just going to be going back and forth and discussing how you might plan out implementing this feature. Claude will give you feedback. Claude will propose sometimes different ways that you can approach designing this, and you can choose which one makes the most sense for what you're trying to accomplish. It's really in that kind of design and planning stage. The second one is, of course, /MCP to connect to MCPs. Figma actually has an excellent guide on how to set up the Figma MCP. I was able to do it in like 10 seconds. It was pretty incredible, and it's just magical to get that working. You can Control-V to paste images into Claude Code. So sometimes if I just have an image or a screenshot of something wrong that I've circled that's wrong, I'll just like paste an image in there, and I'll tell Claude Code to look at that. You can escape to cancel what you just sent. So if Claude is currently running, it's commonly the stop or pause button in Web UI, and it's escape in CLI. You can hit escape twice to go back in history, or you can -- resume to resume a conversation if you've closed it. And then the last one, of course, which I highlighted at the beginning, is /memory. So you can update your claude.md memory file. One thing I want to call out is that I know the terminal can be a little bit intimidating at first. It's not a UI. It's a little bit of a different of a kind of paradigm to interact with your computer. But if you're able to get over that hurdle, it's actually very, very powerful to have a lot of these shortcuts available to you. Amazing. Well, that's it on the slides. I think we're going to head into a demo right now. And so let me
Love a live
just
demo.
share my screen. As you all know, live demos with AI can be a little bit unpredictable, we'll call it, but
Non-deterministic.
that's the beauty of the game. But we're going to try our best. So here in front of me on my screen right now, which I need to share. Is my screen being shared? I think it is.
Yep, I see your screen.
All right, perfect. You can see kind of my typical setup when I'm working in Claude Code with Figma. And hopefully some of these tools are familiar to you. Obviously, I have Figma, I have my designs open, and then I actually have my terminal open. I use iTerm2. The default one on Mac is terminal. And then I'll typically actually start by running a preview of my local app. This is something I learned how to do with the help of Claude. The command for this project is npm run dev. It's okay if none of these words mean anything to you. Often they don't mean anything to me too. I'm just copying and pasting what Claude Code tells me to do. And that's a beauty. And then I'll also have Claude open itself. And so it's really simple. You have Claude downloaded. You open the command and you have Claude ready available for you. Actually, whoops, I'm actually going to run a public version of this. You can pretend you didn't see anything there. And you have Claude Code readily available. And so you'll see that this is actually a local preview of my app right now. It's exactly what's implemented. And in here, you just like regularly type into Claude, like I can say hello and Claude will respond hello back to me. I can ask it questions about this code base. I can kind of get more feedback. It's really just like a regular prompting tool. But the magic, what I'm going to show today is first, I'm going to show how the Figma MCP works. So slash commands are the most common way to interact in a terminal. And if I type slash MCP right here, what you can see is I'm actually already connected to the Figma MCP server. I did this earlier today and like just copying and pasting a command into my command line. And if I click enter, I can see what I'm connected to and the different tools that the Figma MCP server provides. And so Akbar, I'm going to hand it over to you actually to just maybe give a brief overview of all of these.
Yeah, so these are some of the tools that are available to your AI agents via the MCP server. The first one is Get Code, and what that does is it actually provides a code representation of what you're looking at in your design file. And what that will do is it'll provide Claude, any other LLM, just kind of like some context and parsability of what they're looking at in the design. And some of the stuff that goes in there are if you have any components that are put together and they're connected to code components. Through Code Connect, we're able to provide that mapping between what an image component, and like in this case, like a card component or the button component, what that is in Figma versus what exists in your code base. We're also able to provide details like annotations. So if there are any annotations on a design, we're able to bring that in as context so that your agent knows that, like, let's say there's an annotation about how something's supposed to behave, or an annotation about how something's supposed to be animated. By providing that context directly to your LLM, they're able to kind of use that when they're generating code. And then we have variable definition, so bringing over any of the variables and styles that are defined in your Figma file, bringing that over and making that accessible to your LLM. Same thing with Code Connect Map. This is, again, the mapping between the components in design versus code components in your code base. Get Image will take a screenshot of the current selection, and that's really helpful for understanding like higher level visual information. If you're taking a look at how something exists across mobile, desktop, etc., this is a one way to kind of use that. The team is working on even providing larger context windows for just like for an entire file, for instance. That's something that they're still developing, but hope to have some more to share there. And then finally, we have a new tool called Create Design System Rules. And what this will do is just like the Claude.md file that Meaghan was showing off earlier, this will help you create a starter file for creating rules for your design system. So things that exist in your component library, etc., so that the outputs from your AI agent become more predictable. They follow a standard set of guidelines and guardrails that you get to specify. And we just provide some tools to make that a little bit easier to get started.
That was amazing. That was probably more in depth than I actually knew how the MCP server works. And I would say that's one of the beauties of actually using the Claude Code and Figma's MCP server is you just get that all for free. And it just works beautifully, which is amazing.
100%.
And so what you see here, I think actually is a classic example of an implementation that doesn't necessarily 100% match the designs. It's like doesn't really pass necessarily or doesn't really convey the exact detailed implementation of what you wanted to do. Functionally, it's there, but you really want to get it up to spec. And so a very common workflow that I use is you go into dev mode, which is how you access Figma MCP today. These are actually word per word, not word per word, but spiritually what you can find today. If you go to the Figma MCP server explanation, you can copy the link to selection. And then what I do is I say maybe like the current site doesn't quite match my designs. And then I'll look at it and I'll be like the background color, the header, the cards for items, and the item counter, oops, sorry, lots of typos, are a bit off. Can you get them to match my designs? You don't necessarily have to prompt this way. Sometimes you can just say, can you get them to match my designs? And it works. I tend to do this because I'm an over prompter and I whimsically think that it helps the model get there better, but there's no real proof to that right now.
It's also helpful for demos just to explain the thought process and, try to guide the agent as much as possible.
Hmm.
And as that's loading, one thing that I definitely would you like to talk through any of this
No,
stuff?
go ahead. Go ahead. We're just waiting now.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw in the chat or people asking about, like, what is the philosophy behind, translating designs into code? How do you stay grounded in design thinking while stepping into that developer mindset?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say my personal belief in how we can use these different tools and systems is that coding agents just give us a new tool in our toolkit as a designer. And it doesn't erase all the past experience and knowledge that you have around being a designer already. It's just one more thing that you have and one more ability to learn. And similarly, a new ability we need to learn as designers is when to reach to code for code and
Mhm.
when to design. And that's one that I myself even struggle with sometimes because it's fun to be in a code base. But recently, one of my engineers told me, you got to calm down a little bit. We know you can code, but I could have done it in 2 minutes and it took you 2 days. I was like, oh, you're right. That was actually a bad prioritization call on my part. And
Mhm.
so I think where we need to learn how to develop a new skill is like, yes, we all can code, but it might not necessarily be the fastest way. In the same way that, yes, we can all make high fidelity mocks, but sometimes a low fidelity mock is a better
Mhm.
thing to reach for in your toolkit. And so you can kind of think coding that way.
This is kind of the perfect segue into another question that I saw that also got quite a bit of response, was just kind of like why, somebody questioning why the responsibility for code should fall on the designer instead of on the developer, and it shifting focus away from user experience, diluting design expertise, and even inefficiency in the product development process. And I saw one comment that kind of really captured a little bit of the way that I think about this, from Jonathan, that they found it to be the opposite in terms of helping them dive deep into the experience, and being able to explain their design decisions with the context of the code base and being able to have that conversation in a more productive fashion with their engineers.
Mhm.
Is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same reason that you'd want your engineers to understand your design process in Figma and to understand kind of your intentionality and decision making. It's a sliding spectrum of how deep you want to go into this. I think as our rules and as the industry and as the tools we use evolve, like what the base level expectations of us all understanding it will evolve too. But in general, it's behind the idea of just collaborating better with your partners, and the better and closer you can get, the better the code you can get where they're actually working is closer to what also
Mm.
your end users will experience as an end product. And so I kind of think of in general as design like a proxy for code. And then there's a translation layer for that into code. Right now, a lot of that translation layer happens on the engineer's responsibility, but I also think it could become a shared responsibility for the both of us. Like, how can we make sure that this design and experience translates extraordinarily seamlessly to code and then really by product to our end users?
Yeah. One thing that I'd love to kind of show, do you mind scrolling up on the terminal?
Of
We
course.
can see as Claude is working, just like some of the changes that are being made here. And I absolutely love this diff view, especially in the terminal. For folks that aren't familiar with this, this is always really cool to see for me. Being able to see exactly the changes that Claude is making in the behind the scenes, and then even breaking down how it's thinking about these things, how it's operating, is so cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a really fun one, a hard design challenge, but one that I think the team did really, really well. And because I have this running live, I'm not sure if you can all notice, but this is actually live updating in the app. So you can see the image cards are a lot smaller now. We have the outline, we have the drop shadow. Claude will just keep going. It'll keep reading with the help of the MCP server, making sure that everything is working properly and actually aligned to my final designs. And I can continue prompting it. Right now, it's trying to run the server itself. It will always end by doing this, but I just like to run it myself because personally, while these diff views are really great and helpful at times for me, I'm much more visual. And so I like to see it in the designs. And then you'll see here, wow, it cut off this number. So my next step would be then to prompt Claude again and be like, hey, um, no, I'll say no and tell Claude, do this. I might say like, the counter is cut off. Can you help fix that? And then I'll kind of go like line by line at this point and try and make sure things are working. But that's really about it. That's all I have to show today.
Awesome. And I know we're getting close to time, so why don't we jump back into the slides? Let me take over the screen again. Meaghan, do you see the
Yes. Yeah,
awesome,
we're good.
awesome. Cool. Uh That was really fantastic, and thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that I wanted to really quickly spotlight is that you can now quickly install the Figma MCP server with Claude Desktop. I have a little video over here that shares all of that. But essentially, with a one-click, you can set up the MCP server on Claude. You go through the little setup process in Figma, and that can allow you to, again, show that same demonstration of being able to select something in Figma, prompt it in Claude, and then be able to get some either code generated or learn more about the design that you're looking at. And this is what that process looks like. Now, we do have a little bit of time for questions, but I do want to also be cognizant of Meaghan. I know you have a hard stop at 4, so why don't we just quickly start off with this question about what systems is Claude Code available for?
Definitely. So Claude Code, you can have it for Mac or Windows right now. You can use it in your default terminal. You can run it in almost any IDE that has a command line, which is all of them. And we have first-party extensions built out for JetBrains and VS Code, which are two very popular IDEs.
Amazing. And then what models are you able to use with Claude Code?
Today, you can use Sonnet 4 and Opus 4, which is our two leading models. A pro tip I would say is Opus 4 is really great for more complex coding challenges. For me, for the most part, as a product designer, I use Sonnet 4. It gets me really everywhere that I need to go.
Amazing. And then finally, I'm just trying to get as many questions out of you before you jump out. Can Claude Code work in monorepos?
Absolutely, it can. And I think this is where working with your engineer becomes really critical. Monorepos, for those who don't know, are just a different way to set up your code base where everything lives together in one gigantic directory or file space, like all the front end, back end, all the functionality. And the way that you run Claude Code today is you run it just in a repository or in a file folder when you're on your computer. My recommendation, if you're using Claude Code in an architecture like this, is to get claude.md or those memory files set up at different levels in your monorepo. You actually can have more than one claude.md file. It's just another file you add to your project. I've seen different folks tackle this different way. You have one globally, then you have one on like each subdirectory, and then you have like specific ones in different settings or features. Then they all talk to each other, and it is like a minor lift the first time, but once they're all set up, then it just kind of works. And then you as a designer operating in that monorepo can just let Claude interact with all of the MD or memory files that other folks have wrote, and it just understands your system.
Here's a question that I got from the chat that I thought was really, really interesting, and I think might be a little bit from both of us. About somebody, their username is Sparkle Nerd from YouTube, asks, can you use it to test for accessibility? And I'll start with some of the Figma context, which is one of the things that's really, really helpful here is that you are able to kind of take your selection and ask questions to the agent about, like, given what you're seeing, are there any accessibility concerns that I need to address? But then also thinking about how that might translate into code. One of the is there anything that you'd like to share, Meaghan, on using it for that use case?
Yeah, absolutely. Often when I'm implementing new features, I'll just ask, is this accessible? Claude Code can actually search the web as well. So if you want to give it like a specific URL, you can. But generally, models are pretty well trained on this right now. So you can just ask and it'll give you a response. You can even specify which standards you'd want it to follow as well, and it should be able to adhere to those.
Awesome. I also have this other question from YouTube. This is from Track Mode about how does Code Connect fit in with this? Will Code Connect eventually not be necessary? And as of today, Code Connect shows up in that get code output. Like we were saying before, if you have your components connected to code, and just as a quick level set, Code Connect is a way for you to connect your Figma design components with code components that exist in your code base. All that information is super valuable and useful for the MCP, and it allows us to kind of jump directly to the right component and where that component is in your code base to your AI agent so that they can use the right snippets, and they're able to take that initial snippet that you show in Figma as a base for how to proceed and how those props map to those components in code. Longer term, we're looking at ways to make this even easier to set up Code Connect and help you kind of build and maintain that functionality, since that is a bit of the time that currently exists with Code Connect. Making sure that you're able to maintain and build that thing is a non-trivial amount of time, especially for really large code bases. And we want to make sure that folks feel empowered to be able to use those. I love this next question by, hopefully I'm not butchering this name, Jui Patel or Jui. Um, they are a solar designer who is also coding. And if the code doesn't match the design exactly, are there any tips on how they can debug?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is one that I frequently get into. So I think there's kind of two levels to this, and it depends on which level you want to operate at. The first is I highly recommend using the Figma MCP because it gets the actual Tailwind classes of the implementation that you have. And so it's just a lot easier to kind of communicate directly to the model with that code. Like models just are really good at understanding code better than kind of vision, which is the ability to understand an image. And so you can paste in images, use the Figma MCP to really give it detailed direction. And you can add on additional prompting, which you saw I did there, like, hey, like this doesn't look quite right, the border radius doesn't look quite right, et cetera, et cetera. You can use the word ultra think. It's something that we use a lot in our prompts. It just gets the model to think a little bit harder about what it's doing. And I tend to find that prompts it most of the way. And then the last one, this is where it's starting to blur the lines in between engineering and design, but I tend to fall a little bit more on this side, which is at a certain point, just understanding the code itself, getting into like the Tailwind classes. I think that's the easiest way for a designer to get into those nitpicky details. Just building up a base knowledge of how to use that can get you a really long way, actually. And so I would recommend doing that as well.
Yeah. One thing that I'd love to add is that with the MCP server, you can actually fine tune your selection, right? Like you can select a specific part of that design and help debug in that way. And that way you're starting with a lot smaller context and it tends to be more reliable. I want to make sure that, Meaghan, we're not holding you too late. Um, I will wrap up with a couple more questions, but thank you so much, Meaghan, for joining us and talking about Claude Code and how you use it with the Figma MCP server. It was really, really fascinating to see.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. I was really excited to chat about this, and I hope I get to see you all again.
Thank you. Now, before we close out, I also want to make sure that I make it really, really easy for folks who are interested in learning more about the dev mode MCP server on how they can get started and a guide for just kind of like what all the different tools do, how you can set it up within your own editors. There's this URL right there, the bit.ly/dev mode MCP server. I believe our teams are also pasting it in the various chats on the different live streams. That URL will take you to our full guide on the MCP server that allows you to figure out how to get it set up with your code editor, how to get it set up in dev mode, and what is available to you and some best practices. And finally, I'm just going to address this one last question, which is, does the dev mode MCP server support multiple frameworks, i.e. React Native, iOS, Swift UI? A clarification that I love to make here is that the MCP server provides design context to your AI agent that will actually be generating the code. So with that design context, your AI agent can generate it in whatever format that they need it in. Code Connect supports React, Swift UI, Jetpack Compose, and then any other HTML-based web language. And so that context can be provided, but the actual generation of the code is coming from your AI agent. And so you are able to prompt it to match your frameworks, match the code base that you're working in, so that that code is more helpful for you. I'd love to thank everyone for bearing with us at the beginning of our technical difficulties, but also just being an amazing, amazing audience for this live stream. And I really hope that you find some fantastic ways to take Claude Code, take Figma MCP, and build some amazing, amazing products.